Starting our list off at number 10, Lilith. Lilith is a female demon, and sometimes she's seen as a sex goddess, so that's neat. That's a good way to start a list off right there. She first appeared in ancient Mesopotamian and Jewish folklore. In Mesopotamian mythology, she was a winged demon who preyed on pregnant women. Yeah, not so fun after all, it seems. And in Jewish tradition, Lilith was believed to be Adam's first wife before Eve, who, rumor has it, refused to submit to him and left the Garden of Eden to hook up with demons. Yeah, which is a little more of a different route than what we would have done. Instead, giving birth to monstrous offspring in, the underworld. I like that version more, personally. That one feels like a Thor installment. I'd watch that in IMAX. Over time, Lilith's story became associated with other beliefs. Today, it's kind of funny. She's seen as a feminist icon almost in modern times, but Lilith remains a prominent figure in various forms of literature, art, and pop culture. If you ask Siri about Lilith, it's really 50-50 about what kind of story you're gonna get. Sex goddess or demon? Who knows? Number 9, Spring-Heeled Jack. Heading to ye olden days, medieval England, Spring-Heeled Jack was a mysterious character slash demon slash, we have no idea, superhero? Not really sure. He emerged somewhere in the 19th century in London, England. He was described as a tall, thin, and agile figure with red eyes, clawed hands, and this one might be a little bit obvious, but he also has the ability to jump over buildings. So, again, pretty obvious who he is. Spring-Heeled Jack was known for attacking women, but often breathing blue flames and causing them to faint or suffer from shock. Yeah, more than fair with the flame thing. His identity and motives still remain unknown, with some theories suggesting that he was a supernatural being, or possibly, hear me out, an escaped convict. Yeah, he escaped by leaping out of the prison with his blue fire breath. Many believe that this was the infamous Jack the Ripper, because Spring-Heeled Jack the Ripper, I guess they're similar, but they both became a popular figure in Victorian literature and folklore, inspiring numerous sightings and stories. And he might be a demon, so who knows. Number 8, Apophis. Apophis was an ancient Egyptian god associated with chaos, darkness, and destruction. So more of a demon, I would say, on the demon list. He was depicted as a serpent or a dragon and was believed to be the enemy of the sun god, Ra. Now, Apophis was thought to reside in the underworld, and he attempted to prevent Ra from completing his journey through the night sky. Yeah, what a nuisance, right? Hate when that happens. Trying to fly to work and then Apophis gets all up in my shit. It's the worst. I'm like, get out of here, dude. The ancient Egyptians believed that Apophis needed to be defeated in order for the sun to rise and then fall every day. So they performed rituals and spells to protect Ra and ensure, the continuation of the world. We wouldn't mind that. Apophis remains an important figure in Egyptian mythology and has been the subject of many artistic and literary works throughout history. Because, yeah, of course, who doesn't want to paint a demon dragon from ancient Egypt? I want to study that in school. Where was that? Number 7, Wiro. Wiro is popular in New Zealand. It's a figure in the mythology of Maori people. He's considered the god of darkness, evil, and death, set on harming humanity. Yeah, how lovely does all those things sound? According to the Maori mythology, Wiro was one of the children of Rangiuni, the Sky Father, and Papatuanuku, the Earth Mother. He was born in the underworld, and he was jealous of his brothers who lived in the world above. More than fair. It's all hot and stuffy down there. I'd want out too. Fair. It was believed that Wiro could cause illness or misfortune to those who displeased him. So you better smash that thumbs up and hit subscribe, all that good stuff, just to be safe. Never know. Number 6, Lamashtu. Mesopotamian goddess of disease, infertility, and childbirth. Nice, real tender one, this one. She was believed to be a demon who preyed upon pregnant women only. So specific and so horrible. God, some of these are kind of cool, some of them are just all bad, like this one. Lamashtu was often depicted as a female figure with a lion's head, donkey's teeth, and wings. So a little silly, but also quite terrifying. This is what happens when Donkey and Dragon hook up in Shrek. You get this monster coming out. It's not so fun. When it's not animated, it's disastrous. It's a monster. Lamashtu was believed to have the ability to harm people through various means. Devouring them, stealing you from your home, causing you to fall ill, pretty much anything, no escaping this one. To protect against Lamashtu's influence, pregnant women were often given amulets or protective charms. Lamashtu was also associated with witchcraft and was said to have the ability to shapeshift into various animal forms, so be on the lookout for every and all of the animals. Could be demons, who knows.
Number 5, Sir Adrian Cotton DeWalt. Love that name. There are gonna be a couple unbelievable events on this list from World War II, so just a heads up. But truth be told, the war itself is kind of hard to believe. Sir Adrian Cotton DeWalt was not only a man who survived the impossible once, but he made a career out of it. He wasn't like your Blackadder general in the back with a pipe. This dude was on the front lines, tossing grenades with one arm because he already lost the other. He served in the Boer War, World War I, and World War II. He survived being shot in the face, skull, hip, leg, ankle, and ear. One eye and one arm short, this enthusiastic war hero dove into the bloodshed again and again. He was seen pulling pins out of grenades and throwing them with his one good arm during Battle of the Somme. But even as a 60-year-old man, he was still a beast. His plane got shot down in April 1941, he crashed it into the Mediterranean, survived, swam all the way to shore, then he got captured by Italian soldiers, thrown into a POW camp, then he escaped, eluded capture for 8 days, but unfortunately the lack of Italian looks gave him away. He was released 2 years later, and Churchill was such a big fan of him, he made him his rep over in China. He ended up passing away peacefully at age 83. Despite hundreds of close calls with death. Number 4, Simo Heha. This is actually kind of a plug for a short film I'm looking to raise funds for. Check out my Instagram to learn more. But his story is incredible and it's so unbelievable. Simo Heha's story sounds like something straight out of a movie, except it actually happened. A humble Finnish farmer who became the Soviets' nightmare in World War II. He is widely regarded as one of the most accomplished and skilled snipers in history. The Winter War began in Finland in 1939 after Russia decided that it was time to regain some territory. They thought it was going to be easy. But soon they came to fear the man who would be known as the White Death. He was trained as a sniper at a young age, didn't want to take human lives though, so he just became a farmer, but the lives of his countrymen were at stake. The Winter War lasted just over 100 days, and within that time, Simo hit as many as 500 men, his personal best being 40 confirmed hits in one day. Some people estimate that it was over 800 people. In March 1940, he was hit in the jaw by a counter sniper, leaving him in a coma for 11 days. But when he awoke, however, the Russians surrendered. That is poetic justice. Number 3, Alexander the Great. How did this guy exist? Was he the son of Zeus? The case is so convincing that even Alexander believed it himself. During the 15 years of his conquest, starting from his first victory when he was 18, Alexander never lost a battle. He was so prolific in battle that his strategies are still studied to this day. Before Alexander entered Egypt, they had been under Persian rule for just over 200 years. Through his incredible prowess and lightning-quick decision-making, Alexander defeated them. Egypt was so happy they even claimed him as their pharaoh. While he was in Egypt, however, Alexander decided to make the long trek to visit the shrine of Zeus Ammon. According to the man himself, he was guided there by ravens, and it even rained during his journey, which was interpreted as a blessing. When he got there, the priest named him a son of Zeus. Now, if that doesn't make this guy sound like a myth, then I don't know what will. Number 2, Boadicea. Boadicea is the Morrigan in my mind. She is Xena, warrior princess. This woman was so ferocious, she was called the scourge of the Roman Empire. Yeah, that's right, this queen took on the Roman Empire. At the time Rome was invading the south of Britain, Queen Boadicea ruled the Iceni tribe of East Anglia, along her husband King Prasutagus. Though her early days remain mostly a mystery, she remains among the canon of heroes who defended the British Isles. She was fearsome to behold, with flaming red hair and a gaze so sharp it could cut glass. She and her husband fought against the Romans until his death, after which the Romans drove straight to take her on. They attacked her daughters publicly, which, like Mother Bear, not a good idea, after which she toured in a chariot rallying the people in rebellion. She sacked 3 Roman cities and took no prisoners. She annihilated the 9th Legion when she took out their entire relief force. Sadly though, Boadicea fell after a vicious battle, but her name echoes in the halls of heroes. And last but not least, Richard, Saladin, and the Third Crusade. Just the Crusades in general are just unbelievable. Never in history have 2 rulers been so equally matched. Currently I'm reading Warriors of God, Richard the Lionheart and Saladin and the Third Crusade by James Rustin, and the fact that everything I've read so far isn't just the next Game of Thrones novel astounds me. These 2 never met because Saladin believed that kings should not go to war if they had met, but because they were fighting over the Holy Land, war was kind of inevitable. But while Saladin did not engage in warfare, Richard dove right in the middle of everything. They both had such incredible admiration for each other that in the middle of battles, they would send each other gifts. I don't understand. You killed my men. You killed my men. Here's a fruit basket. literally happened. And another example, during the Battle of Jaffa, Richard's horse ended up being killed, and Saladin was so impressed with him that he sent him 2 new ones. 2! On top of that, Richard had taken off half of his armor before he had leapt ashore to fight. So he was like basically like half naked. Eventually Saladin tried to have him assassinated, but Richard was so ferocious in battle that everyone feared him. The dude was pretty much a human bulldozer. The 2 assassins ended up waking up the camp because they were fighting about who should take the guy out.
Kicking off our list at number 10, Western camel bones. Scientific name being Camelops hesternus, meaning yesterday's camel in Latin. There's a fun fact. Now these bones first appeared in 2008 when gold miners were working in Hunter Creek. It was only 60 miles away from the Alaskan border, when all of a sudden they stumbled across these massive bones, ancient bones. The last time these bones were operating on, actual limbs was 75 to 125,000 years ago. Isn't that incredible? The remains were in such great condition because of the awful surrounding conditions. It was so cold that scientists could actually still extract DNA, which told us that 10 million years ago, roughly, Western camels split from modern day camels. Yeah, we had more camels. Now we don't have many camels. Sad. The more camels, the better. Number 9, Allen Hills meteorite. Alright, this one's for all the space nerds. This next one is literally out of this world. Back in December 1984, American meteor hunters discovered this fragment in Allen Hills, Antarctica. Now this meteor was appropriately named Allen Hills 48001, which is okay, that's right to the point. Now this rock was speculated to come from Mars, and in 1996 a scientist claimed that he discovered bacteria from the microscopic fossils on this meteorite. Now the news of course spread quickly and everybody started to lose their minds. Rightfully so, this is a while ago. Bill Clinton even chimed in. He made a speech about possible discoveries in space with aliens and shit. The scientific community later said this was not the case after further studies, but never say never. Feels like we're getting closer to finding life now with James Webb. I don't know, every time I click refresh, it's like, check out this thing that's in the past. I'm like, what? Number 8, more meteorites. For this one, we'll switch it up. This time, scientists found ice in meteorite. Nice, it's always a good time. James Webb is about to hopefully show us how much water is in space, and I personally am not ready for it. Back in 1990, after the 094 meteorite was discovered in the Algerian mountains, the rock was dated back to 4.6 billion years ago. So scientists studied the meteorite with synchrotron radiation-based X-ray nanotomography, leading scientists to find evidence of tiny pores. Pores believed to have been fossilized ice crystals. That's fun. That's, again, space aliens with water. Who knows? Hopefully. These pores have come from when the meteorite crossed the snow line in space. Now the snow line is a sphere around the sun. It's the exact point where ice on meteorites melts. It's pretty cool. The study was to hopefully find out where water comes from in that galaxy, and it seems that it came from a lot further than we all thought, which is comforting, I guess. Yeah, there's water in space. It's just, way the fuck out there. Number 7, viruses. We're all talking about an ancient virus that's coming back now, some ancient mummified frozen virus. Sounds like we're doomed. Just over a year ago in China, scientists discovered an ancient virus. These samples came from the Tibetan Plateau, and the samples were originally collected back in 2015. Now the contents date back to around 14,400 years ago, long before Captain America went into the ice. And there's dust, gases, and of course, viruses over that long accumulated time, and glaciers just soaked it all in, right? Layer after layer, pushing history deeper into its icy core until scientists come in with a few megadrills. Now we're finding dinosaurs, we're finding bones, and also sometimes we find 33 viruses. Yeah, 33! That's like 2 more than my family computer had growing up. That's a lot of viruses. 4 of these viruses typically infect bacteria, and the rest were novel, which means that it's never been seen before. Yeah, how neat is that? Novel viruses. Just what the world needs right now. Number 6, Otzi the Iceman. Discovered in September 1991, this mummy was found on the border of Austria and Italy. He's Europe's oldest known natural mummy. It's pretty amazing. He was covered in ice shortly after his death, so most of the 45-year-old man from the Copper Age was left in rather good condition. A 5,000-year-old man was found in ice. You lose this round, Captain America. Again, I'm just saying. I really thought I'd put you on this list. Not this time. Before we passed in the Italian Alps, Otzi had a number of health problems, it seems, that we've now found many years later. He had arthritis, Lyme disease, and he was lactose intolerant. Thanks to science, we now know that Otzi the Iceman was sharpening his tools right before his death. So he fought till the end. What an OG.
Number 5, the smooth-hand fish. Not to be confused with Cool Hand Luke. The smooth-hand fish was the first time in modern history where a marine-type fish has gone extinct. This fish was a shallow water bottom dweller, and I personally love him because he looks like one of the Bowser's minions. He looks moody. He has a fin that protrudes out of his face. Just 200 years ago, you would have seen these smooth dudes in the land down under. It lived in Australia, in Tasmania's warm waters, and what made this fish so unique, as its name hints towards, is its hands. The smooth-hand fish would seemingly walk along the ocean floor using its fins as hands. The smooth-hand fish would seemingly walk along the ocean floor using its fins as hands. So an angry-looking fish with hands and a horn would walk towards you? Hard pass. Graham Edgar, marine ecologist at the University of Tasmania, shed some light on its habits, explaining that these fish were homebodies. They didn't have a large habitat. They just had like all the hands for the house. They spent most of their time sitting in the seabed with an occasional flap for a few meters if they're disturbed. At that point, they would just walk with their hands away from the drama. That's how I want to walk away from drama from now on. Like somebody brings it up to me and I'm just like...
Number 4, Permian Triassic, aka the Great Dying. Okay, what a nickname, love it. And one of the most mysterious extinction events on this list. Let's talk about it. The Permian Triassic extinction event destroyed the vast majority of life on Earth over 250 million years ago. Life was booming and then silence. Scientists have been boggled and bamboozled for years, but these pieces may finally be coming together. This event is not to be confused with the death of the dinosaurs. That's a different thing, which is still not as sad as the film The Land Before Time. No, this was an event so great that trees, plants, lizards, proto-mammals, insects, fish, mollusks, again, always mollusks, and then microbes didn't see coming. No one saw this coming at all. 9 out of 10 marine species, 7 out of 10 land species just entirely vanished. Scientists discovered this event by evaluating fossils and sedimentary rock. While all the previous layers were teeming with life, there was a brief period where it all vanished, like a hamburger without toppings or tartar sauce. Gone in 60 seconds. Just a smooth burger, nothing's getting in the way of that. No tartar sauce dripping down your shirt. Absolutely. That's how fast it went. There are 2 explanations in the running. One was that it was due to a massive volcanic event, and 2, of course, an asteroid. But so far there have been no traces of either. One hint is the massive anomaly in Wilkes Land, Antarctica. NASA spotted gravitational changes which indicate an object of immense size sitting in a 300-mile wide crater. A massive object over 151 miles across and dives about 2,700 feet deep beneath the ice could be the massive rock that reset the world 250 million years ago. Or, I know what you're thinking, could also be aliens. We're 50-50 here, we're trying to figure it out.
Number 3, passenger pigeons. Commonly confused with the mourning dove, the passenger pigeon once ruled the skies over Canada as recently as the 19th century. They're quite similar to the pigeons we see today, only instead of being aggressive and covered in mustard, they were quite graceful. Billions of these orange beauties painted the skies, and rumor has it they would fly in flocks so large it would block the sun out for a couple hours. Flocks that block. But only a few decades passed and the passenger pigeons are no more. What happened? The very last passenger pigeon was Martha. Oh, Martha. She passed away in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1914, so we took a look at her DNA to see if Martha held any secrets to their extinction. They discovered Martha had a low genetic diversity for such a growing population. Natural selection and hunting eliminated arguably the coolest looking bird out there.
Number 2, the 6th extinction. Remember the book Rachel told me to mention? Well, here it is again, it's that good. Here's a big question no one is ready for. Are we part of the 6th extinction? Is it happening right now? In the past, asteroids and ice ages have all caused massive extinction events, but after human beings invented the wheel and discovered fire, things started to change. In the 1800s, industrialization drove up extinction rates and continues to do so. Based on this list alone, we know how much human beings have played a role in extinction events of the past. Have we created one that we can't stop? According to Elizabeth Kohlberg, across the world, scientists are monitoring what could be the largest extinction event since the dinosaurs. That's right, the way human beings interact with the environment and affect biodiversity could be more deadly than an asteroid hitting the Earth. Come on, we gotta wake up. With an ever-climbing list of endangered species, Kohlberg and the world asks this question. Could this be mankind's lasting legacy, and is it too late to change it?
And next up we have the Dunkliosis. Now it may sound silly because it has the word dunk in it, But this ancient fish did not shoot threes. It actually shot its head at you into self-defense at 50 milliseconds a jab. The Dunkleosis was a 34-foot long armored fish that came from the Devonian era. Its fossil was first discovered in 1867 by Dr. David Dunkel. He of course named it after himself in Dunkel fashion. It swam confidently in subtropical waters, and weighing around 1 ton, which is 2,000 pounds, the dunk was kind of a bully. But it's not his fault, he was born this way. Its massive skull was well equipped with 2 fangs, and these razor sharp teeth would rub against each other as they grew. So if the dunk's big rock head wasn't intimidating enough, he's also sharpening his mouth 24/7. As for diet, the dunk would use those fangs on anything that crossed its path during their coral commute. They would eat fish, sharks, and dare I say, other Dunkleosteid. Cannibal fangfish for the win! Luckily, these guys aren't around anymore. They all went extinct around 360 million years ago during the Devonian extinction. For a scary look fish, it has a rather sweet name. Shout out to David Dunkel, thanks for all your hard work.
Topping our list at number 10 hasn't actually happened yet. April 13th, 2029. Some of you may know by now about that recent Leo DiCap and Jen Lawrence movie Don't Look Up. Well, it seems like we're about to experience a little bit of that reality, as it's predicted on Friday, April 13th, 2029, the most hazardous asteroid to Earth, 99942 Apophis, is set to pass Earth a mere 18,000 miles away. That's a lot closer than any of the satellites we ourselves have put into orbit, so put that in perspective. Now rest assured, because this could be a lot scarier than it is if it was to come any closer, but journal articles state that there's no real damage that will occur. However, there is some potential for some intense heat or even an effect on some gravitational pulls. Personally, the idea that a meteor of any kind could just come crashing into us with no warning and just end it all, yeah, that's pretty intense. A terrible ship captain puts January 13th, 2012 at number 9 on the countdown. It's a beautiful Italian getaway and life is good. That is until the Costa Concordia cruise ship stuck off of a reef on the Isla di Gregorio and began to tilt. Passengers and staff were quick to start moving themselves against the tilt as fast as possible, being evacuated on the lifeboats. However, as the ship came to rest completely on its side in the shallow waters, survivors had to be airlifted to shore by a helicopter. Tragically, 32 people did in this wreck, and a massive salvage operation took 19 hours to raise the ship from the reef where it came to rest, using multiple cranes. The captain did not go down with the ship, he actually fled during the evacuation. If you know anything about boats, it's actually not a joke that the captain is to remain on board with everyone else until everyone is safely off, even at the cost of his own life. The captain of the Concordia, Francesco Cittadino, was arrested for multiple manslaughter charges and abandoning the ship instead of directing evacuation. Next up, tragedy in Evansdale. July 13th, 2012 is number 8 in the countdown. Friday, July 13th, 2012, cousins Elizabeth Collin and Lyric Cook Morrissey were dropped off at grandmother Wilma Cook's house. They leave at noon for an afternoon of outdoor adventuring. Not long after, they're spotted by Myers Lake, and later at Lake Avenue, and then never again. Their grandmother, concerned at their lack of return after a few hours, called family and then called police. What started as a small police search turned into a sheriff and fire department search, but all that was ever recovered was the girls' bikes and Elizabeth's purse. After this, FBI's brought in with infrared aircrafts, cadaver dogs, and they combed the lake, but still no luck. 5 months later, the worst case scenario is confirmed when hunters in the Seven Bridges wildlife area stumble across 2 bodies, who were eventually identified as Elizabeth and Lyric, found 25 miles from where they originally went missing. Autopsy confirmed the girls had met foul play, but that's the farthest police had progressed, leading the cousins to remain a cold case. This case is incredibly similar to that of the Delphi, Indiana murders of Abby Williams and Liberty German, who went out to enjoy a walk on a local trail and also disappeared. And speculation of a serial killer this region has existed for a long time. Both sets of girls were Caucasian, similar in age and appearance, and both were found in rural areas by hunters. Chillingly, the dates of both girls had vanished. 7/13/12 and 12/13/17 are anagrams of each other. Number 7, a real-life horror story happened in San Diego on April 12, 2012. 22-year-old Brittany Kilgore got out of a bad relationship and was starting anew. She had a lot on her plate and she was looking for help in moving. Unfortunately, she didn't have any friends who could, but she did meet Luis Rey Perez, who asked if he could assist her, even have 5 of his friends come and help her too, on the sole condition she partied with him for just a night. She needed help and she was newly single. What harm could come from it? It was a couple days later that the body of Brittany Kilgore is found. Who'd Brittany met was not who she thought. Perez had a pregnant wife, Dorothy Maraglino, and a mistress, Jessica Lopez, back at home who acted as SMA puppets and partners. These 3 had concocted a scheme wherein Perez would find and abduct a woman to be used as an unwilling participant. Evidence showed Brittany to be their victim, as her DNA was found in their dungeon and items such as handcuffs in their home. Perez, Maralingo, and Lopez were all found guilty, and all 3 received life sentence without parole and will be deservedly rotting in prison. October 13th, 1972 is number 6 in the countdown, when 174 people were killed in the deadliest airplane crash in Russian history. The plane involved in the incident was a 4-year-old model with no prior history of malfunction. As it approached Moscow at the height of 3,900 feet, Moscow Air Control gave the instruction to descend to 1,300 feet. The crew confirmed the instructions and started the descent as per usual. But rather than leveling off at the 1,300 feet, the plane suddenly lost altitude until it crashed into the ground at 390 miles per hour with no apparent reason as to why. To make matters worse, the plane was only 3 kilometers from the landing strip where it crashed, and at no point were the spoilers retracted or landing gear prepared. The lack of mic communication to the pilots after the descent began also leaves us without answers. While there has never been an explanation for the crash's cause, many speculate it was a lightning strike. But many don't ignore the coincidence that country roads take me home. It's West Virginia Penitentiary. This gothic baddie definitely completes with Danvers, in which looks more like a vampire's house in a Scooby-Doo movie contest. But like Danvers, this beautiful exterior may pass for a mansion or castle, but it is a shell for the bitter truth within. West Virginia Penitentiary opened in 1860s and was intended to mirror the prison in Joliet, Illinois. Unfortunately, inmates were immediately crammed into tiny cells that measured 5 by 7 feet, sometimes occupied by 3 prisoners each. Most prisoners had been convicted of serious crimes, with the most feared inmates being locked up on the north side, dubbed the Alamo. More chillingly, inmate Paul Glenn was made to build the prison's electric chair, dubbed Old Sparky. Close to 100 people were condemned to death, either via the chair or by noose. Unsurprisingly, the prison's tough, cramped, and often brutal condition, not to mention high number of death penalty inmates, earned it a reputation as one of the harshest correctional facilities in the US. During an inmate uprising in 1973, prisoners held hostages and set fire to the prison basement. Another in 1986 saw 20 inmates storm the cafeteria in protest at poor conditions. The following years had series of high-profile breakouts. The prison was closed in 1995 after a court order ruled that the conditions were inhumane. Who would have guessed? This asylum is also in the Bagel City, Willard Asylum. Built in upstate New York on the bank of Seneca Lake towards the end of the 19th century, it starts off well-intentioned and pretty decent. It's created around the idea of moral treatment, keeping patients clean and fed, keeping them occupied with sewing, gardening, and other tasks, and even, dare say, attempting to treat their illnesses. And while this idea was successful at first, like teenagers in love, some things ain't meant to last. Like any place in the mid-1900s trying to handle mental illness, there were deaths. Because of most of the residents had nowhere else to go as societal rejects, and since diseases like tuberculosis and typhoid were still knocking around the building making it a quarantine, it's estimated that about half of all patients who arrived never left. But that's not the creepiest part. When the asylum was closed in the 90s, workers made a discovery in the attic. There they found 400 suitcases, carefully wrapped and labeled with the names of patients and filled with their belongings. See, the average length of a stay was around 30 years. Many of those who died didn't have any family left to claim anything. So rather than throw everything away, staff packed patients' possessions into suitcases that they had when they arrived and stored them in the attic, to where they remained as a time capsule for hundreds of forgotten lives. A Lovecraftian muse, it's a blend of beauty and nightmare. It's Danvers Estate. Not only inspiration for Arkham Sanatorium, H.P. Lovecraft also mentions it in Pickman's Model and The Shadow over Zinsmouth, and it's understandable why. This hospital, constructed in 1887, is hella gothic. Check that out. Nice, right? Anyways, it was designed based on a mental health advocate, if you want to call them that, at the time's concept of a positive environment. That meant ornate interiors, private rooms, and long, rambling wings that would let sunshine in. But while Danvers was meant to be an appealing place for whose interior promoted the health and well-being of its patients, as the decades wore on, this structure that was only meant to hold 600 patients was housing a population of 2,360 in 1939. The staff, whose size had remained relatively stable, was at a loss loss for how to control the patients who were sick and dirty from their lack of care. Visitors to the hospital in the late 1940s described the patients as aimlessly wandering the halls or vacantly staring at walls. Sometimes the patients passed away out of the staff member's sight and weren't discovered for days, rotting away in some forgotten room. Eventually, all of the nightmarish trappings of the asylum were introduced: solitary confinement, straitjackets, shock therapy, and it was the birthplace of the transorbital lobotomy, a procedure that spread all around North America. Portions of the hospital were blocked off starting in 1969, and most of it closed by 1985. The entire campus shut down in 1992. The old Inunaki Tunnel deserves its own horror franchise, let alone a video game. Deep within the mountains of Fukuoka, Japan, is the small remote village of Inunaki. A sign saying the Japanese constitution is not in effect passed here hangs near the entrance of the village. The area near an old Inunaki Tunnel has been considered to be haunted due to a number of killings connected to this place. The tunnel's construction was completed in 1949 and was closed when a new one was constructed in 1975. In December of 1988, the charred remains of a man were found within this closed mountain tunnel. The perpetrators of this gruesome act were 5 young men who'd wanted to rob the man and steal his car. All were sentenced to life. In another case, a young couple in the mid-70s broke down on the roadside and went in search of help, and they were confronted and killed by an old man with a sickle. The area also has a history that goes back over 1,000 years as a training ground for esoteric Buddhist practitioners who claim the area to be a spiritual hotspot of lost souls. The tunnel itself has been sealed off with concrete blocks, but an opening at the top of the tunnel still allows entry for anyone foolish enough to climb over. Seeing as it's no longer in use and far off the beaten path, that means no assistance would be able to reach you in an emergency situation, so it's highly discouraged you try anything stupid. And finally, not the Italian getaway you're looking for, the Ospedale Psichiatrico di Volterra. Man, that was hard. Dubbed the place of no return, the ruins of this hospital now lay decaying in Tuscany, Italy. Inside, there are still a few items that were left in 1978, the year the hospital was abandoned. Wheelchairs, an old telephone booth, sunbeds. Founded in 1888 for the mentally ill and poor, the ward did well in the early 1900s with significant development, expanding gradually with the creation of shops, services, an agricultural company, and a judicial section. Luigi Scabia's plan was to build an independent village in which patients could feel free but also rehabilitate and tailor work to each patient. This is how it goes until Luigi dies. After that, his successors over-accept patients and the hospital grew to become one of the largest asylums in Italy. 6,000 people were housed in a ward at a time, with 20 sinks and 2 toilets every 200 patients. People were sent there not only for minor emotional problems, but also for political crimes. Patients were subjected to controversial treatments such as insulin therapy and electroshock. Inmates were often sedated, isolated, or placed in tanks full of ice. The rooms had prison-like grates and the nurses were addressed as guard or as superior. Patients were even tied to their beds in straitjackets, and letters from family were concealed from them. This hospital was shut down with the Basaglia law that ended the age of asylums in Italy. The walls of the hospital courtyard are still covered in carvings of a patient who was locked inside for more than a decade, and the structure rots away into the ground.
Starting off with some geography, we got Lake Nyos. How can a lake kill 1,700 people? Well, though it sounds too insane to be true, it did indeed happen. Located in West Africa, the lake itself is deceptively beautiful. However, on August 21st, 1986, a mysterious cloud burst from the lake. It flooded towards the village and suffocated 1,700 people and animals. Nothing survived the event. The reason this happened is because beneath the water there is a pocket of magma that leaks carbon dioxide into the lake. The CO2 stays dissolved in the water due to the pressure of the 650 feet of water on top of the magma secretions. Crazy, so kind of like a pop bottle with an invisible lid. Until one day, that lid popped. On that day, the lake abruptly depressurized and the CO2 exploded into the air, causing the devastating event. Today, pipes are used to siphon the CO2 out from the bottom of the lake in order to prevent this from happening again, but imagine when it did happen, it must have felt like some kind of magical grim occurrence. For sure. Number 9, the Salem Witch Trials. If you follow me on MA, you just know how much I hate the Salem Witch Trials. I hate them so much, okay? It's an event in history that is so inconceivably stupid, it's hard to believe it actually happened. The Salem Witch Trials occurred in Massachusetts between 1692 and 1693, where more than 200 people were accused of witchcraft and 20 were put to death. It all started because the daughter of Reverend Paris, Elizabeth, who was 9, and his niece, Abigail Williams, same age, started having fits. Another girl, Ann Putnam, age 11, started having them as well. The supernatural was blamed, and soon the girls began accusing everyone they could, mostly people the town didn't like. Basically, if you confessed and you wanted to be saved, then you weren't executed, but if you were accused and didn't confess, you were killed. The paranoia was so bad that once you were accused, you couldn't escape this guilt they put on you. It was insane. But after the paranoia finally subsided, the colony admitted that they probably made a mistake and compensated the families. Like, yeah, oops, might have gotten a little carried away there. Wow, whew, I got excited, sorry guys. Here's some money. The Salem witch trials today represent what happens when paranoia rules a courtroom and the whole thing still beguiles the world even 300 years later. Number 8. Unsinkable Sam. On a happier note, this is the kind of story that makes people believe that cats have 9 lives. Unsinkable Sam was the nickname for a cat who survived several shipwrecks during World War II. His tale begins aboard a German warship called the Bismarck. Among the 2,200 soldiers was a black and white cat that somehow snuck aboard. One day, the Bismarck was decimated during an attack, and while the HMS Cossack was looking for survivors, they saw Oscar the cat, name of the time, seeking refuge on a plank, like Jack from the Titanic. They hauled him aboard, but then several months later, the Cossack would be decimated. That's shipwreck number 2. This time, it was the HMS Ark Royale who spotted him, and was then dubbed the name Unsinkable Sam. And then, shipwreck number 3, months later, as you can guess, the Royale was torpedoed, and once again, Sam was saved by the HMS Legion of the British Royal Fleet. Finally, this seafaring feline retired to land and later died in 1955. Number 7. Nelly Bly. Nelly Bly is a woman right out of a Jules Verne novel. In fact, you would think so if she hadn't met the man himself. In 1889, Nelly Bly took on a record-breaking voyage by traveling around the world in just 72 days. Her means of travel included a train, a steamship, a rickshaw, horse, and donkey. Her goal was to beat the fictional record set by Verne's hero Phileas Fogg in his 80-day Odyssey. An event like this already appeared as a myth to the men of the time. Her editor at the New York World nearly refused to send her because her gender would make the trip impossible. No one but a man could do this, he told her. Very well, she replied. Start the man and I'll start the same day for some other newspaper and beat him. He backed down, and eventually Nelly was on her way, turning fiction into reality. Number 6. The Black Museum. No, I'm not talking about the Black Museum episode of Black Mirror, but honestly, not too far off. People have done some pretty vicious things to their enemies. There's a long list, but imagine turning your enemies into a permanent dinner guest. Because that's exactly what Ferdinand I of Naples actually did. Though everyone thought he was going to be a great king, he actually ended up being pretty psychotic. He would invite his enemies over for dinner, and while they gorged on pheasant, he would take them out, either the old-fashioned way, or literally throw them out of a window. He would then retrieve and dress the bodies and stage them. He called it his Black Museum and would invite new acquaintances to view it so they would know exactly who they were dealing with, so not to mess with him. What a psycho!
Oh look, it's the D-Bags day off. Camp staff. Check out this jolly-go-lucky group. They got the day off of work because the weather was nice for the first time in a long time. During the wartime, that must have been awesome, especially being young. Finally shirk responsibility, maybe go get a pint, have a picnic, hang out with each other, maybe get a little frisky, lavishing in the sun. I'm done looking at them. In fact, I'm sick by having to look at them. When that group of people is gonna have lighted and silly summer fun on a day off, they're going back to their jobs at the camps of World War II to do exactly what you're thinking they would be doing for work when I say they work at the camps of World War II. And they enjoyed it. This wasn't one of those mandatory war jobs or excuses you can make up for following orders. These young adults, who may as well be the grandmothers, grandfathers, or great-grandma or pa of people even watching, chose to do this job and actively enjoyed it. So this is a good reminder it's not that far in the past, and these people most likely took lives shortly before or after this photo was taken. Did Halloween come early, or is it just Sylvester Claus? Yeah, so I chose this photo out of, trust me, like thousands of equally creepy ones because I feel it truly captures the what the bleep factor this holiday has. And they do it every 31st of December to 13th of January. The Sylvester Clausen of Ernach and the surrounding area Appenzell custom that is famous throughout Switzerland. The custom derives its charm from the unique blending of contrasts such as nature and art, mystery and tradition, harmony and anarchy. The Sylvester Claus that ushered the old year out and ring in the new. There are 3 types of these clauses: the beautiful, the ugly, and the pretty ugly. Common to all the clauses are bells in various shapes and sizes that they wear on their bodies. Their rituals begin in the early morning each day. The various Schupel meet at the village square before each group goes its own way. A group will pull up in front of your house, then hop around and jump up and down to make their bells ring, and then they start yodeling at you. You listen to the yodel, they say Happy New Year, give you some cash, some liquor you have to drink from a straw, and then they just leave. Dark backstory gossip, however, in times of poverty and hunger, which afflicted the region frequently, Clausen was a way to earn a little extra money, and in the 1930s, what was known as Belchel Claus, aka the Beggar Claus, began to appear on the streets. Essentially homeless Santa Clauses, but Santa looked like that. As a result, the influx of beggars in the Claus Guide resulted in heavy restrictions, and in the 1950s, the custom had nearly died out. It's only thanks to the initiative of individuals in the 1970s that this got to come back and enjoys enormous popularity today. Somebody come get their creepy uncle. Cannot tell me this isn't the energy this photo gives. Creepy uncle. The woman is unidentified, but definitely a follower to be able to handle that guy's BO and greasy hands on her. It was taken of the Children of God leader, David Berg. This group started in 1968 in California after Berg claimed God himself had gifted him with prophecies. In reality, Berg started making extreme demands of his followers, give up their money, worldly possessions in exchange for limited outside access, horrible cramped living conditions, brainwashing, and would make this group famous for really bad reasons I can't and would rather not get into. Former members of COG have been outspoken about the childhood they suffered growing up in the communes. Actress Rose McGowan, the most famously outspoken, published her story of 9 years in the group. Actors Joaquin and River Phoenix, also raised in the cult, had it harder than Rose, and that trauma plagued River especially. He was actually the original heartthrob of the 80s and 90s, a role, fun fact, DiCaprio only managed to take once River's substance addiction caused by his traumatic childhood unfortunately took his life. So more of an unfun fact, but the matter stands that River painted the way for DiCaprio, and this psycho ruined a lot of people's lives. Have you ever seen a photo you can feel? Before you see the photo itself, you're gonna learn about the man in it. So, Joseph Goebbels, a National Socialist politician and propagandist who held multiple high-rank roles in the Yahtzee party. As a party chief for Greater Berlin, 1926 to 45, Reich leader of propaganda, 1929 to 45, and in 1933, the push-broom mustache twit appointed Joseph the Minister for Propaganda and Public Enlightenment. He was a devout, unbridled through and through bigot, a tireless agitator, and the propaganda this man designed, wrote, and funded had shipped through dozens of countries and shaped the perspective of Jews in a way that can actually never be undone. It's this propaganda many people still cite when asked for factual basis or logical argument as what Jews had done oh so wrong. It's Joseph who orders the mass burning of literature, who sentenced thousands to death, and who made up lies to ensure hatred, a hatred that still stands today. And I want you guys to see how he looked at them. So here is the photo, finally. This is a picture of Joseph Goebbels taken only seconds after he found out the photographer was Jewish. In this photo, you can feel it, and it's effing terrifying. And now, the last photo is from El Monte, 6 May. That's the date written on this photo from the LAPD Collective, and it's the only other photo from said collection I chose to put on this list aside from the holes in the car window. As follows is the photo and James L. Roy's written description of it. This is a detective modeling a mask worn by Baxter Shorter's crew. Shorter was in a gaggle with Emmett Perkins, Jack Santos, and Barbara Graham. The three of them then killed an old woman named Mabel Monahan on 9 March 1953. Shorter was appalled by his gaggle's violence. He ratted the others out, and Santo and Perkins kidnapped him in front of his pad on Bunker Hill, took him to the mountains, and killed him. Shorter had a sister that lived in El Monte, and they were hunted sifting through it for evidence. This mask was in her pad. James Ellroy. If Mabel Monahan's former son-in-law tutor Scherer hadn't been a Las Vegas gambler, the 60-year-old widow probably would have never been killed. Also, if she didn't stay friends with him after he divorced her daughter, that'd probably have helped. But she did, and people found that weird. So there had to be something at play, right? Maybe Scherer trusted her so much he stored his 100-grand floats there. Ex-cons Emmett Perkins, John True, and Jack Santos think that, and they plan to take it. Barbara Graham joins the group to be their key into the door. Mabel takes a while to open up, but Barbara persuades her with the story of a broken down car and pleas for the phone. Mabel was reluctant, but the young woman was alone, and the widow knew firsthand how scary it could be for a woman to be on her own at night, so she let her in. And in comes John True, Jack, Emmett, wearing rubber masks. We're gonna take a pause. Ladies and female presenters, our own sex does not guarantee our safety, and you can't predict anyone's intentions. Please trust your gut if it says don't open that door. Mabel is struck on the head, left gagged and bleeding in the hallway. The group ransacks her home for a safe that never exists and panic when there is none, so they just leave her there. Mabel is dead for 2 days in her home before she's found. The investigation into the slaying of the Burbank widow began, and it was a long one, filled with drama. In the end, the four are charged with conspiracy to commit burglary, robbery, and M-word on June 3rd, 1953, in the death of Miss Mabel Monahan.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the golden toad. Scientists usually use frogs as a diagnostic for how things are going to go on our planet. And the answer is not good. Usually it's not good. Especially not for the froggy woggies. Amphibians breathe through their skin, which I gotta say, one, gross, but it makes them extra sensitive to changes in their environment. The golden toad extinction event happened pretty recently and very quickly. In their native home of Costa Rica, it was considered a good omen, or lucky if you saw it, but then sightings of this shiny dude became less and less, and then poof! 1987, these tiny little guys started to disappear one by one. Like the dreams we had as kids, almost, some would say. The local population was ill at ease, and they had good reason to be. Alongside the golden toad, nearly half of all frogs and toads also started dying within a 30-kilometer range. And even stranger is that the area was free from human intervention, which led scientists to conclude that the cause was related to, you guessed it, climate change. As the temperatures rose, the frogs became more susceptible to the chytrid fungus, which decimated frog populations worldwide. And in 1989, the golden toad was the first species to become extinct as a direct result of climate change. Sad stuff. Rachel recommends reading The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Kolberg because, well, it's a good one, so check it out yourselves.
Number 9, the Peanut Island tortoise. When the Mayans said the world was going to end in 2012, they may have just been onto something. We lost the last peanut giant tortoise back in 2012, and his name was Lonesome George. His name was Lonesome George. I'm gonna be the first to cry on this. And for decades before his passing, scientists were trying to get him to mate with females of a similar subspecies, but he just wasn't feeling it. To be fair, look at him. The guy looks exhausted. He looks like he needs 3 coffees before swiping right on mating apps. Lonesome George and his wrinkly-necked friends. This is sad, Taylor. Lonesome George and his wrinkly-necked friends weighed in at about 400 pounds, growing up to 6 feet long. Again, this extinction comes back to us humans with the use of tortoises as an onboard food in the 19th century and the goat population of Pinta Island growing rapidly during the 60s and 70s. These tortoises ran out of food.
Number 8, the Labrador Duck. Love ducks. You might as well play Goose Goose Duck because sadly, the Labrador Duck is no more. But even before it went extinct, the Labrador Duck was always rare, and it's served that way. Also referred to as the pied duck or the skunk duck due to its coloring, not its smell. Not much is known about its behavior and habitat, but we do know that it liked to hang out in sheltered bays, sandbars, harbors in New Jersey, Long Island, New England, and of course, coastal Labrador, northern Quebec. Did it have a New York accent? Did it have a New York accent or a Canadian one? We just can't be sure. We've been looking, but honestly, we don't know at this point. The Labrador duck went extinct in the 1870s, but the direct cause is still unknown. Was it eaten to death? We don't know. The bird was known to taste bad, but it was pretty cheap for meat at the market, so that could be one possibility. But the ducks were actually hunted for their feathers more than their meat, and their eggs were harvested as well. Another reason is that they were often in competition with us over their main food source, which were, as you would have guessed, mollusks. Human interaction obviously played a massive role in its ducktails, especially considering the last known specimen was shot in New York. Shot in New York. Not a movie, assassinated in New York. Did they realize what was happening around the time? Probably, yeah, realistically probably. But it just goes to show how much the level of care has differed over the last century in relation to extinction.
Number 7, the Great Auk. Its name makes you think this thing is the size of a moose or it's some type of ox, when in fact it's really just a cute, flightless seabird. Rather. Once belonging in colonies off North Atlantic coast, the Great Auk would grow up to 30 inches long and its tiny wings would only be used to swim. Water wings. They were much smaller than 13 centimeters long. Little penguin flappy arm, no wonder they couldn't fly. They were cute but quite defenseless. Around the 1500s, European fishermen discovered this perfect area for hunting, and it just happened to be where most of these great auks were hanging out. Newfoundland looked like the iceberg in club penguins, so quite a few of them bit the bullet. By the 1950s, the last 2 known specimens were hunted by a fisherman on Eldey Island, just off the coast of Iceland. So if you need to pay your respects, that's where you need to head.
Number 6, the stellar sea cow. Just like bumblebees are the whales of the insect world, they were the cows of the sea. Okay, I think I know about these cows. Hailing from the same order as the manatee, the stellar sea cow was a stellar sea animal until the very end. But they may return one day. Fingers crossed, more on that in a second. The stellar sea cow was named after George Wilhelm Steller, who discovered this massive blubbery creature in 1741 during the Vitus Bering's Great Northern Expedition after the crew became shipwrecked. Adults would have weighed about 9,000 kilograms and could reach lengths past 11 meters. That's a whole lot of cow. Despite surviving since the Pleistocene epoch over 2.6 million, 11,000 years ago, they were no match for humans. They only swam at a meter deep and communicated via huffs and sighs to their family and lifelong partners, as I do normally. Are you hungry? Kind of. George Steller commented that the animals had an uncommon love for their families, which made it incredibly easy to hunt them. Okay, that's really depressing. Leave it to humans to exploit love in order to kill. Classic Bruce Willis stuff. Considering the 1-year gestation period, the species just couldn't reproduce fast enough to keep up with the hunting, so they just died. But they may return. Scientists were able to sequence the genome, which can mean we could see these creatures again one day.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the Italian Renaissance dark side. Just at the tail end of the years of the medieval period, as we transitioned into the Renaissance period, began the Italian Renaissance. When we think of the Italian Renaissance period, it is known for the development and the rebirth that it caused, which makes a lot of sense considering the word Renaissance means rebirth. But there is one less glamorous and slightly frightening side to this period that isn't always spoken about. Sailors who had been returning from the New World at this point brought something less than lovely back with them, and that was syphilis, which spread through an entire French army. After this, the troops brought what was called the Great Pox to the rest of Europe. Since there was no penicillin back then, the disease spread rapidly and the symptoms were pretty gruesome. It would often happen that the person who had fallen ill would have the skin on their faces essentially be rotting away, which would leave large ulcers. Sometimes people's noses or lips would be pretty much gone, and it happened often that people would very sadly pass away from the disease. So basically, what we think of as a really beautiful time in Europe was both world-changing but also very scary and kinda close to a zombie apocalypse. In our number 4 spot today, we have William the Conqueror. In 1087, William the Conqueror decided to take on an all-alcohol diet. This is because he was suffering from extreme obesity and was struggling because of that fact. Because of this, he told his staff that he would only drink wine until his weight went down, but he ended up passing away less than a year later, and most of us are told that obviously this was because of the wine-only diet. That's actually not true. In an astonishing turn of events, this wine-only diet actually worked. Shortly after beginning his diet, he was able to ride his horse again, which was one of the main reasons he started the diet in the first place, as he was previously too heavy for the horse to carry. He actually died after falling from his horse during an expedition, which was completely unrelated to either his weight or his diet. It's entirely possible that had he not gone on this diet, he would have never ridden his horse and maybe would have lived longer? Truthfully, who knows? But I suppose in a very roundabout way, he did still kind of die from his wine-only diet. In our number 3 spot today, we have Olga of Kiev. Olga of Kiev became queen regent in 945 CE after her husband was killed, and during the time her son was too young to rule just yet. Olga knew that once her son was old enough to be crowned king, her power would be taken away, so she needed to see her wishes carried out before that happened. Her wishes included the capturing and killing of those who took the life of her husband, which was carried out by using scalding hot water. Yeah, Don't even want to imagine what that would have been like. Don't kill the king, I guess. Historically, it really doesn't seem to work out well. Apparently, in doing this, however, Olga developed a bit of a bloodthirst, and she would not rest until everyone associated with the people who killed her husband were all eliminated. It seemed like if you even looked in the wrong direction or breathed in the vicinity of someone who had something to do with the king's slaying, you could kiss your own life goodbye. Olga took hundreds of people out of the tribe that the killers were from. She devised a plan to bury the tribe leaders alive, and she even came up with a plan to set fire to their entire village. It is said that Olga may have locked the tribe's leaders in a bathhouse and burned it down, but we don't know for sure. All we do know is that she definitely was not okay. In our number 2 spot today, we have Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was a deputy to the ruler of the Mali Empire, but when the ruler went missing while on a sea voyage to find the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, Mansa Musa became the ruler in 1312. During his rule, European nations were really struggling due to civil wars and a lack of resources, but the Mali Empire was flourishing because of their abundance of resources like gold and salt. Under his rule, the empire grew to take up a large portion of West Africa as he conquered 24 cities and their surrounding districts. At this time, Mali was one of the top producers of gold in the entire world, which left Mansa Musa as one of the wealthiest historical figures ever. One of the most well-known events during his rule was the pilgrimage to Mecca. This journey took place from 1324 to 1325 and spanned an estimated 4,000 miles, and it was the first time people outside of the empire saw just how wealthy he was. He traveled with 60,000 of his men, all wearing Persian silk, along with 12,000 slaves who each carried 4 pounds of gold bars, and he also brought heralds who had golden staffs, along with a bunch of camels and horses. This pilgrimage had a profound effect on Egypt as this huge group of people passed through. From the markets in Cairo to the royals to the impoverished people that crossed their path, Musa left Cairo littered with so much gold that it depreciated the value of the metal in Egypt, and it took decades for them to recover. In our number 1 spot today, we have St. Marcellus's flood. This was actually a very serious extratropical cyclone that swept through around January 16, 1362. This cyclone eerily matched up with the new moon, and it spanned through the British Isles, the Netherlands, northern Germany, and Denmark. Here's the thing, this storm not only lined up with the moon, but also peaked on the feast day of St. Marcellus, which is the reason it got its name, but usually people refer to this one as the second because there is another. The first St. Marcellus flood took the lives of 36,000 people as it swept through the northern Netherlands in 1219. The second flood, however, while no one is sure the exact numbers, it is estimated that at least 250,000 people lost their lives. While there have been plenty of devastating floods in history, this one is said to be blamed on Atlantic gales, and that this event goes hand in hand with the Great Wind of 1362.
Our first stop is Italy's Kolinaro Psychiatric Hospital. It's part of artist Herbert Baglioni's project 1,000 Shadows, which represents the tortured souls of those who passed in this place that still roam the halls. That's why anyone who visits this long-abandoned psychiatric hospital a little outside of Parma, Italy, may be in for a fright, stumbling across the black, ghostly figures painted alongside the walls, floors, ceilings, beds, cribs, and wheelchairs. This asylum went into operation in 1873 after the cholera epidemic. This ancient palace was refurbished as a hospital for the sick and was actually meant to be a convent. As a temporary setup, it was highly unprepared for what was to come or how it would stay. Inside, there were more than 1,000 patients, the asylum taking in not only the mentally ill, but also orphans, homeless, addicts, vagabonds, and working girls. The corridors were thin and narrow, and the rooms were organized into small compartments, so patients were often disoriented walking the different floors, and the tiny cells immediately led to discomfort from claustrophobia. Usually hospitalized people of this time were forgotten by everyone, so it was as if they disappeared when they went there. Naturally, psychiatrists working in this institution were free to take advantage of that and experiment with new treatments and practices such as electroshock or frontal lobotomy. This way the doctors felt like innovators and experimenters, while patients were no longer considered people to them. Italy's ban on asylums with the Basaglia law closed this hospital in 1979. Some former inhabitants of Kolinaro speak of strong noises, thuds, sounds of water, and slamming doors that they heard during their silent nights there. From the psych to the pen, let's talk about Missouri State Penitentiary. It was the oldest continuously operating prison at one point, and Time magazine once described this infamous maximum security facility as the bloodiest 47 acres in America. Opened from 1836 to 2004, in the 168 years of operation, this prison saw executions, inmate uprisings, escapes, and corruption, so much that it earned that nickname of the Bloody 47. Inmates were subject to intense abuse and neglect. A guard could whip a man for literally anything or nothing at all. Look at him wrong in line. He's having a bad day. Men in the dungeon would be beaten within an inch of their life. These 4x3 cells would sometimes have as many as 8 or more people in them. In 1937, a bill was passed in the state allowing execution by lethal gas. A total of 40 men and women were put to death in this chamber here until the capital punishment inmates were moved to a new prison. Among famous former inmates are James Earl Ray, the convicted assassinator of Martin Luther King Jr., and John B. Firebug Johnson, who earned his nickname by starting a fire there that killed several inmates. Meanwhile, on a more positive note, Charles Sonny Liston arrived in 1950, having been convicted of robbery and, having learned to box while inside, won the National Heavyweight Championship in Chicago in 1953. Visitors can see the yards, tiny cells, housing units, and, most chillingly, the gas chamber. A familiar name may be Jonestown, Guyana. One of America's, if not the world's as a whole's most shocking mass tragedies was the deaths of the 909 members of Jim Jones' doomsday cult. Jones started as a preacher who formed the People's Temple in Indiana in 1950s. He later moved his followers to California and then in the 70s to the remote Amazonian village in Guyana, where he promised that life would be a utopia. It wasn't. It was a hellish labor camp meets tropical island, and it ended in disaster as Jones's followers fed themselves and loved ones no-name brand Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. While that was happening, those who tried to escape with visiting American politician Leo Ryan were met with bullets on the airstrip. This now once promised utopia sits and decays, being swallowed back by the Amazonian rainforest. Empty living quarters, untouched workrooms and garages, a children's school, and Jones's famous preaching pavilion with his chair still front and center, they all remain. While you can visit, it is an immense amount of work to accomplish, but you'll know you arrived when you see the friendly arches and their jolly green font welcoming you to Jonestown. Call it Hotel California, except you don't want to check in. The Sanzi Resort. Their construction began in 1978 with the intent to create a modern tourist destination north of Taiwan. Doting cute color pops and pastels, all still in a quirky modular shape, these resort units would have been immensely popular if a series of tragic events combined with financial trouble and local superstition hadn't eventually led to the complete cancellation of the project in 1980, only 2 years after they got started. There were many stories in circulation that suggested the site of the Sanzi UFO resort was cursed. People believe that spirits of those who lost their lives in fatal construction accidents roam this site. People think that the land is actually cursed from ancient Dutch burial ground, as 20,000 skeletal remains of 17th century Dutch soldiers were found on the site, according to lore. And to add to the creepy factor, some locals are convinced that the destruction of a Chinese dragon statue that once stood at the entrance of the resort property, demolished to widen the road, led to the site being cursed and the subsequent fatal accidents. The site lay abandoned for 3 decades, accessed by only squatters, ghost hunters, and nature. Then sometime between 2011 and 2014, the structures were finally demolished and the site cleared. One of the scariest places in America is McPike Mansion. Tucked into the countryside of Alton, Illinois, this Victorian mansion has a very long history of strange activity and reported paranormal phenomena. The house was built in 1869 by architect Louis Pfeifenberger. The original owner of the mansion was Henry Guest McPike, who owned 15 acres of land then known as the Mount Lookout Park. Here, McPike, a horticulturist, perfected his McPike grape. The family lived in this, their country home, until 1936, and then it was abandoned just like that. The house has changed hands several times since its original owner, Henry McPike, hasn't lived in it since the 1950s. The building has been home to the Browns Business College and was later owned by Paul Leschinger, who rented rooms in the house to other occupants. While it's uninhabitable, the current owners, who have invested thousands of dollars into renovating the dilapidated home, believe that there are dozens of spirits who maintain presence in and around the home, closing doors, throwing things, and banging around. It's readily known today for its hauntings in paranormal circles. The grounds are often visited by ghost hunters and haunted tour groups in the area, even TV shows such as Ghost Adventures. Number 5 in our countdown is the Andes plane crash that also happened on October 13th, 1972. While the Russian airliner's victims were all killed on impact, the story of the ill-fated Air Force Flight 571 is one of extreme trepidation. After hitting an air pocket and being unable to regain altitude, the pilot lost control and the flight was slammed into an Andes mountain. The plane hit another 2 to 3 times before settling on the mountainside. 12 were instantly 7 were pulled into Fields Gate before the plane's second impact, and another 4 died at final impact. 29 survivors were left sprawling along the icy mountainside, their plane's white fuselage all but invisible in the snow to any would-be rescuers that passed overhead. And after only 10 days, the survivors huddled around a radio listening to a broadcast saying that the search for their rugby team was called off. Imagine the defeat of that moment, realizing nobody was coming. Well, 2 of the survivors felt nothing but spite. They packed up and set out on foot. With no mountaineer or climbing experience, the men managed to survive 10 days and stumble across a local who alerted authorities to the situation. The 2 men managed to lead authorities back to where the remaining survivors, now only 16 of them due to an avalanche that decimated the fuselage and another 8, so that they were finally rescued in late December. This is an intense level of perseverance, but none more so than being pushed to cannibalism. While it was first met with public revulsion, forced perspective of the incident made it obvious that these men were reduced to a brutal but necessary decision. Using shards of glass, they slowly had to start picking away at their family and friends in order to survive for over a month. Of course, when asked 50 years later, survivors state that they did what they had to, and they would do it again if need be. March 13th, 1964 made psychology textbook infamy. Number 4, how 30+ people witnessed the crime without one person intervening. Kitty Genovese was returning from the bar where she worked around 3:15 a.m. in the morning and parked her car only 100 feet from her house. While walking in an alley to get home, she was attacked by Winston Moseley in the middle of the road that was surrounded by apartment buildings with windows overlooking the area. During this attack, she was stabbed twice, and Kitty managed to break free from Winston, screaming out repeatedly that she had been attacked. This was apparently heard by many neighbors, but only one of them, Robert Moser, opened his window and screamed at Moseley to let that girl be. For a second it worked. Winston fled, but only to return with his face disguised and finish the job. Kitty had lost a lot of blood and was barely able to move, making her unable to open her apartment. Winston found her in a back hallway of her building, where he stabbed her to death and unfortunately assaulted her. The attack spanned at least a half an hour total, and Kitty died en route to the hospital in an ambulance. This event was preventable as it was witnessed by over 30 people. No one called the police or intervened. Interviewed after the fact, the neighbors gave a myriad of excuses as to why they didn't. They didn't want to get involved or be nosy. They thought it was a lover's quarrel. The tragic case became a staple in psychology classes as a way to illustrate the bystander effect, or now called the Kitty Genovese effect, which occurs when people fail to act in a situation because they assume just someone else will step in. Moseley recently died in prison at the age of 81, deservedly. Number 3 in our countdown, April 13th, 1963, we're touching down in Jamaica to discuss the atrocities of the Coral Gardens massacre. The Jamaican government was decimated by the acts of British colonialism, and when they finally pulled back from governing the country, it left the economy, housing, and job availability buckling. The Rastafarians of the time were viewed with suspicion and contempt and found themselves harassed by the authorities often. The story begins with Rasta convert Rudolph Franklin, who became embroiled in a land dispute. Franklin was farming illegally, and the landowners employed the services of the local police to evict the squatters. In an altercation erupted, and Franklin was shot 5 times. He was taken to the hospital and treated, but only to be immediately arrested for marijuana possession and sentenced to jail time. By the time Franklin was free, he was a rightfully bitter man. A year later, Franklin and several Rastas had been squatting peacefully on the land in Coral Gardens, part of Montego Bay, that the Jamaican government was planning to make into a tourist-only area, which meant it would become a no-go area for the Rastafarians. When the land was sold to Ken Douglas, who attempted to drive the squatters off of their rightful land, an all-out riot started at a gas station property. The building was burnt and 8 people died, including Rudolph Franklin. Prime Minister Sir Alex Bustamante was visiting the scene along with the Commissioner of Police and head of Jamaican Defence Force. Bustamante's response: bring all the Rastas in, dead or alive. Police was dispatched to Coral Gardens and the surrounding areas. More than 150 bearded men, assumed to be Rastafarians, were rounded up and arrested. The men were beaten, tortured, and some were even killed, and many had their locks cut off in a violent disrespect of their culture. Jamaican government officials have since apologized and put forth reparations to Rastafarians in 2017 for what they incurred that Friday the 13th. Number 2 in the countdown is the Paris attacks of November 13th, 2015. The attacks in Paris are remembered for their suddency and terror. While it's happening in the moment, it seemed that there was no end, no safety, and no place to run to. Functioning in 3 coordinated teams on the night of Friday the 13th, attackers hit the concert hall, a major stadium, restaurants, and bars almost simultaneously and left 130 people dead dead and another approximate 413 wounded. At 9:20 p.m., the first attack happens at Stade de France. 5 minutes later, an attack happens in the 10th district on Rue Alibert. While emergency forces are scrambling to the first two locations, the nightmare's brief pause ends at 9:32 p.m. As a few streets south of Alibert, more attacks are reported at Café Bombière and La Casa Nostra Pizzeria in Rue de la Fontaine à la Roy. 4 minutes pass and now it's attack reports from Rue de la Charonne at 9:38 p.m. Another 2 minutes pass and the chaos ensues at Boulevard Voltaire. And then the final blow is between 9:40 p.m. and midnight, when a sold-out concert venue seating 1,500 fans of California rock band Eagles of Death was attacked at full force. By now, the president was in crisis talks with Prime Minister as well as interior ministers, and the president announced a state of emergency through France and a tightening of border controls. Please understand, while these locations weren't on opposite ends of the city, law officials are being hit with all of these events in rapid succession on what expected to be a normal night. They're understaffed, unprepared, and that's truly what was the most scary. November 13th, 1970 left a continent decimated. Number 1 in the countdown, one of the most tragic natural disasters in history happened Friday 13th, November 1970, when Cyclone Pahola hit Bangladesh. Found to be the equivalent in strength to that of a Category 3 hurricane, it sustained winds of 115 miles per hour, and a storm surge allowed the shallow waters of the Bay of Bengal to funnel ocean onto the land. According to a 1970 report of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the surge pushed water up 16 feet high. Devastatingly, due to the Indo-Pakistani friction at the time, it's believed that if either country had known much about the incoming storm, they didn't share it with each other. It was noted that a large amount of the population had no idea the storm was coming, and there was indication that East Pakistani's storm warning system was not used properly, costing tens of thousands of lives. With nowhere to evacuate, people climbed trees to escape rising water, and many were swept away. Research reports that in a 1972 journal, the highest survival rate was adult males aged 15 to 49, which is consistent with the impression that those who are too weak to cling to trees, such as old, young, sick, and malnourished, or females in general, were selectively lost to the storm. The Bahura cyclone confirmed 300,000 people, but it's believed to have taken the lives of 500,000 people, making it the deadliest tropical storm in history.
Starting off with S for Secrets. Alrighty, so here is from the Polish Constitution Day celebration in Chicago, specifically the one from 1978. On the left there, all washed out and crappy old flash display style, is First Lady Rosalind Carter. The guy shaking her hand, or rather just holding it and staring off camera like a waiter just went by with a tray of warm sausage rolls he wants to really get into, is John Wayne Gacy. And if you're also thinking, yo, what is up with this guy being in so many random famous photos, you're absolutely right, and it's genuinely strange how photographed and out there Gacy was. By the time this was taken, he had already killed over 20 people. Also, when he wasn't side hustling as a clown, he was super active in the government and politics, thus why wearing the S on the lapel. It was given to him by the Secret Service to indicate special security clearance. So the S literally does stand for secrets, both the US government's and his own, whose secrets are worse though, huh? Anyways, at the bottom of the handshake photo, you can see the handwritten address to John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalind Carter. I've heard beauty is pain, but I haven't heard beauty is the next Saw movie? Check out the Beauty Calibrator. Seeing pictures, you may think it's some sort of Middle Ages torture machine, or as said, literally one of those Saw movie head devices. But surprisingly not, it's another way to point out women's insecurities and find the smallest things possible to make them feel bad over. Meet the Max Factor Beauty Calibration Machine. It is the only one in existence, thank God, and in 1932 the makeup legend Max Factor came up with this ingenious invention combining phrenology, cosmetics, and insecurity gaslighting with pseudoscience analysis of a woman's physical flaws. Max Factor's Beauty Calibrator enabled Hollywood makeup artists to pinpoint where facial corrections needed to be made down to a literal fraction. The machine, also known in the trades as the Beauty Micrometer, revealed that a natural perfect face was a myth. Every single woman was imperfect and needed correction, and this machine could find it by taking precise measures. It would mark spots that needed to be fixed, and then the artist, once the helmet was removed, could correct all the new insecurities with makeup that you didn't have before you put the stupid thing on. Next up is a photo that's all dramatic flair, the death card. Masseria represented an outdated mindset in the mafia world, one that could no longer be reasoned with diplomatically. The same is true of his rival Marandano. The ongoing tit-for-tat killing between the two genuinely wreaked havoc on not only the streets but in the mafia hierarchy itself. himself. Those resistant to change generally don't last long, and meetings of the Mafia elite tried to bring around at the end the bloodshed, but Marantano especially consistently manipulated matters to his own advantage. In order to facilitate underworld peace, the consensus turned from diplomacy to the inevitable. One of these guys had to go. The final straw, according to the account of Nicola Gentile, was when the police informants called Masseria and said knock off the violence. Having an idealism for peace, he actually responded by disarming his men, and they were all pissed. Joe the boss, Masseria, his bodyguards, and Lucky Luciano all met at a seafood restaurant at 3 p.m. on April 15th of 1931. Luciano excuses himself from the card game while that they're playing to visit the bathroom. This is the signal for the hitmen. The bangs could be heard from around the block apparently, as Joe was hit from behind 4 times in the back and 1 in the head. And it's born, the infamous Ace of Spades shot. It added to the cult status of this hit, but many expect that the Ace of Spades card was placed between Masseria's fingers after the hit by a photographer, just for the shock factor of the press. Next is a series of photos recovered before they could be lost. Holes in a window. Former LAPD reserve officer turned photographer Merrick Morton was faffing around in the LA Police Department when he comes across a stash of LAPD crime photos ranging in the dates of 1920s all the way to the 1970s. These were cellulose nitrate based film, and the negatives were so decomposed they're deemed fire hazard, but Merrick saw enough of the few stills to know that they'd be an absolute effing gold mine. Working with Phototeca Photo Digitation Service and the US National Film Archive, the photos were given a new life. This collection is NSFW, and there are hundreds. Now spruced up, the macabre photos are mostly crimes, and many of them violent and depicting the bodies or surviving victims' injuries. Obviously, the ones you're seeing on screen as I'm talking are tamer, such as my choice, the one you're seeing now, Holes in the Car Window. Something about it gives me a deep sense of discomfort, thus the choice. The collection contains recognizable crimes and faces too, an unusual photo of Malaya Nurmi dressed as Vampira, pictures of comedian Lenny Bruce's OD in March of 1966, and images of the Manson family arriving at their arrangement in 1970. Every photo is scary, and every single has a disturbing backstory. Some captions are provided by author James Elroy in his book LAPD 53. You can win, but sometimes you still lose in the end. It's the devastated Disneys. Meet Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. There are some everyday photos of these two in their prime. Who were they? In case you couldn't tell by all the Disney crap in the background of said photos, they played somewhat of a big role. You know, writing the lyrics and music for Oliver and Company, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Beauty and the Beast, as well as a few others. Also, not to mention creating the Little Shop of Horrors, which got them hired by Disney in the first place. And in this photo you see now, they had just won the Oscars for The Little Mermaid. Hooray! But why does Ashman look so unhappy? This was his life's accomplishments. It's because that night Ashman told Menken they needed to have a serious talk when they got back to New York, and when they get back a few days later, Ashman admits that he has HIV that's quickly progressed and he's going to die soon, and fast. They had been songwriting partners for over a decade and were in the middle of working on Beauty and the Beast, and despite the illness, Ashman completed the lyrical work and the initial work on Aladdin. On the morning of March 14, 1991, he does die from heart failure caused by his condition. At the time of his death, he only weighed 80 pounds, he'd lost his sight and could barely speak, and a voice that spoke so eloquently through song was lost forever. Before he passed, however, Disney Productions scrambled to finish the film so he could see a screening of it. The film earned Ashman and Menken 3 1991 Academy Award nominations for Best Song, and the title song winning the award. Perhaps most amazingly, Beauty and the Beast was the first animated film ever nominated for an Academy Award for Best Motion Picture. So it looks like a photo of two men achieving their wildest dreams, but it's a record of their last normal moment together.
Number 5. Asog, not to be confused with Asap, not the same at all. My autocorrect was not, I'm like, no, that's not the one. Asog is a demon from Sumerian mythology who is associated with disease and destruction. The 2 D's you don't want right there. Not D&D the fun ones, the D&D the bad ones. According to legend, he was born from the god Anu and the goddess Ki, but was rejected by both of them, yikes, because of his monstrous appearance. That's sad, that's pretty sad. They both rejected him because of his looks. Like, guy, you made this, what are you talking about his looks? That's half you. Asog is depicted as a large horned creature with a scaly body and sharp claws, said to bring chaos and fear wherever he goes. Yeah, definitely. Asog is often associated with the spread of illness and pestilence. Now, Sumerian mythology really did not like this one. Some versions of the myth would have Asog be defeated by the god Ninurta, who uses the power of the storm to vanquish the demon and, restore order to the world. Which, yay. So unless you have a storm lying around anywhere, it's gonna be a tough fight. You're probably gonna lose this one. Number 4. Floros. Floros is a fun one. As far as appearances go, he's a little different. Not so much a dragon this time around, so that's great. Floros was said to have the power to cause destruction and chaos. Now, according to some accounts, he would appear as a leopard or as a man with the wings of a griffin. Two very different descriptions, but I'll take it. I like the cheetah version a bit more. He looks so vulnerable that way. He looks like he's like naked, like he forgot a towel after he showered. I don't know. As far as demons go, not as intimidating. But as far as powers go, he packs a punch. Floros is associated with fire and is said to have the ability to control or summon it, just like that. How fun. Yeah, flame on, I guess. I'm never sleeping again. Floros is also known for his ability to reveal hidden secrets and to protect those who summon him. So if your homie's with him, you're good. Otherwise, fire and silly walks are coming your way. It's said he should only be summoned by experienced practitioners of the occult. So no amateurs allowed, just people that are OG with the occult, and you're good. Number 3, incubi and succubi. 2 for the price of 1. Let's go, why not? Incubi and succubi, these supernatural creatures are from various cultural and religious traditions. So, you know, pick your poison. They're often described as demons that prey on humans during sleep. So, yeah, say goodbye to your 8 hours. Incubi, they're male demons who visit women in their dreams, often for sexual purposes. Yikes. While succubi, they're female demons who visit men in their dreams. They're the Bonnie and Clyde of confusing dreams, I guess. In some traditions, they're believed to have been the offspring of fallen angels and mortal women. The legends of incubi and succubi have actually been used to explain sleep paralysis. So, I hope that didn't just ruin your day. His and her demons. How cute. Number 2, Baphomet. Baphomet is a deity that originated in medieval European occultism and has since been associated with various mystical practices, as are all of these. They're just used many a times in many a places. Baphomet is typically depicted as, well, you'd guess, the classic winged humanoid disgusting looking figure with a goat's head and scary horns. But here's where Baphomet, dare I say, here's where they stand out. They're often seated on a throne with an inverted pentagram symbol. Yeah, this guy sounds a bit familiar, doesn't he? Baphomet has been associated with various occult concepts such as the union of opposites and the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment, which is, I mean, don't Google those, that's for sure. In modern times, Baphomet has been adopted by various groups and movements, including that of Satanism and the occult. This is our OG Satan right here, that's him, I guess. I say our, like I'm part of the cult, I don't know, that was weird. The earliest reference to Baphomet is a letter written by French Crusader back in 1098. So yeah, keep an eye out if you see a demon humanoid on the Iron Throne. I guess watch out for that guy, sure. And finally, number 1, Leviatar, the best for last, in my opinion. The goddess of death and pain, according to Finnish mythology. We'll finish with the Finnish. There we go. She is also known as the Lady of the North, which sounds like a character from Game of Thrones, but she was a little more haunting than the naked Red Witch was. Yeah, a little different looking, that's for sure. And she's believed to be the daughter of the god of the underworld, so daddy issues for sure, probably. Leviatar is described as a tall woman with pale complexion, dressed in all black clothing, and she's associated with disease, plague, suffering, pain, illness, all that good stuff, and is said to have given birth to 9 diseases. 9. Not 2, not 3, just 9 diseases. Couldn't get enough of them, just here, take them all, why not? Leviatar was feared and respected by the ancient Finns, and offerings were made to her in times of illness or calamity. Her influence can still be seen in modern Finnish culture and folklore. Again, creating 9 diseases, yeah, we're probably gonna talk about her for a few years. Like, don't do that maybe. 1, fine, maybe 1 to build character, but 9 diseases? Too much.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Pope Gregory IX. Pope Gregory IX was the Bishop of Rome and the ruler of the Papal States from 1227 until his passing in 1241. The Papal States were a series of territories in the Italian peninsula that were under direct rule of the Pope from the 8th century all the way to 1870. It turns out that Pope Gregory IX had a very strange hatred for cats. He said that black cats were actually instruments of Satan, which seems a little extreme, but then he actually went as far as to order that they be exterminated throughout Europe, which is definitely a little extreme. With this order, the Pope's followers had to oblige, and there was a drastic reduction in the cat population. But of course, this caused a disturbance to the ecosystem, and the time and the consequence of that became very evident. Because of the decline of cats, there was a sudden increase in the amount of rats, most of which may have been carrying the plague. There are a lot of historians who would argue that that this war on cats may have had a huge effect on the severity of the Black Plague. That is of course speculation, as it's pretty difficult to pinpoint who could be at fault for something like that, but it certainly is a very interesting point. This all really does, however, bring me to my next point. In our number 9 spot today we have the Black Death. I'm sure we've all heard of the Black Death at some point or another. I mean, how could we possibly ever stop talking about something like that? During the 1340s, there was an outbreak of the bubonic plague that spread rapidly throughout Europe and Asia. It was called the Black Plague because of the fact that this illness would cause people's lymph nodes to become swollen and black. The Black Death was absolutely terrible, and it caused a lot of agony for those who had to go through it. Symptoms included things like severe body aches, fever, vomiting, and eventual death in most cases. There was no cure for the plague, so it just continued to spread. In the end, the Black Death took the lives of hundreds of millions of people. We now all know firsthand what it is like to live through a pandemic, and I certainly wouldn't sign up to do it again anytime soon, so I'm most definitely sure the times of the Black Death were some of the worst times in history. Apparently it is said that if you lived in the 1340s, there was basically a 50-50 chance that you'd survive the Black Death, and then on top of that there's all of the other horrifying ways to die that the medieval times held. All in all, I'm kinda shocked that we're still here today. In our number 8 spot today we have the Mongol invasion. Being in China during the Mongol invasion certainly was a terrifying time. I'm sure a lot of us here have heard at least some of the stories surrounding Genghis Khan, but if you haven't, let's just say that being on his bad side certainly wasn't a good thing for you. In 1205, when the Mongol invasion in China began, it was the regular citizens of China who paid the ultimate price. What was started by Genghis Khan was carried on by his son and then his grandson, which ultimately led to a 74-year-long campaign that was filled with brutality and destruction. Cities and towns were destroyed, empires were brought down, and millions of completely innocent people lost their lives. It is believed that this invasion took the lives of enough people to cut the population in half from 120 million before to just 60 million after. Anyone living in China at this time would have had to live in absolute fear of being killed for something that you really had nothing to do with. That would be awful and absolutely terrifying. In our number 7 spot today we have Pope Formosus and Pope Stephen VI. Pope Formosus was the ruler of the Papal States from October 6th, 891 until he passed away on April 4th, 896. After his passing, Pope Boniface VI took his place as ruler for just a few weeks before he also passed away, which then left Pope Stephen VI as the ruler from then on until his death. After this whirlwind April of 1896, things got even weirder. Before his passing, Pope Formosus had sided with Arnulf of Carinthia against Lambert of Spoleto, which was definitely not okay with Pope Stephen VI. So, once Pope Stephen VI gets to the place of being the ruler, he gets the people to exhume the body of Pope Formosus so that he can put him on trial. I feel like this is very gross and very unnecessary, but this really is the type of stuff that went on in the 800s. They propped the body up for trial and had a deacon answer questions for him since he obviously was unable to do that himself. They ended up finding the corpse guilty, which seems a little unfair, and they actually went as far as to strip the body of its sacred vestments, took 3 fingers from the right hand as they were the blessing fingers. They dressed the body in regular people clothes instead of the clothing a pope would be buried in, and then they reburied the body. If this poor man's body hadn't been through enough, it was later re-exhumed again and thrown into the river. If this story wasn't already wild enough, this whole debacle is actually what would later end up getting Pope Stephen imprisoned and then killed. Alright, so I guess the other pope had his justice in the end. I don't know, man. In our number 6 spot today we have King Charles VI. King Charles VI started off his reign by being very well loved and respected, but as time went on over his 4 decades of ruling, he ended up being known as Charles the Mad. His erratic behavior had him hacking up nights, imagining that he was St. George, and he would also have bouts of amnesia where he would be able to recognize some people, but not his wife and children. This is all very strange and of course quite sad, as he was obviously exhibiting signs of extreme mental illness, but one of the strangest symptoms was him believing that he was made of glass. He was terribly frightened of falling or being jostled too hard, and he would actually insert iron rods into his clothing to try and keep himself from shattering. But then he would also apparently run wild at top speeds parades throughout the halls of the castle or the streets, which would obviously mean that he was completely abandoning his sphere of fragility. It apparently got so bad that he had to be held inside with the entrances blocked off. Sadly, he continued on this path until he passed away in 1422.
Number 5. Underneath Thwaites Glacier. We've seen some fascinating stuff here on B. You know, I do my best, specifically underwater footage. I know that gives us all the creeps. We love exploring the deeps for some reason, and this next one I couldn't believe, honestly. You're about to see footage from the bottom of an Antarctic glacier, so buckle up. This glacier is the size of Florida, so if it collapses at any point in our time, our sea levels could rise 10 feet. And in 2019, researchers drilled 2,300 feet through the middle of Thwaites Glacier. Then they dropped a robot with a camera right down, and they saw this. For the first time ever, we've now seen the grounding zone of Thwaites Glacier. Lead scientist Brittany Schmidt says this project is a dream come true, and I can't agree more. It's her walking on the moon moment, and I could not agree more. This feels like another universe almost. This looks like the upside down. This is terrifying. There's only 1 meter of space between the bottom of the glacier and the rocky seafloor, so think about that when you sleep tonight. Number 4. Message in a bottle. Back in 1959, a geologist named Paul Walker, no, not that one, not even close, he decided to bury a message in a bottle, and he wanted to make a lasting statement about climate change, so he put this frozen message underneath rocks near a glacier in 1959, and then cut to 2013, well, what do we find again? We find Paul Walker's message in a bottle. The message inside was measurements, and to be exact, it was the length from the exact point of the bottle to the edge of a nearby glacier. But by 2013, many years later, said glacier had shrunk down 200 feet, so now the glacier was much further. A lasting statement indeed, I would say. Good call, Paul Walker. Number 3. Ice Age art. More ancient artwork, but this time we're going to the Colombian Amazon. Now the thing is, unlike other drawings found on the ceilings of tombs or anything like that, this frozen canvas stretches about 8 miles. It's incredible. The paintings inside, they're even more impressive. Dating back to 12,000 years ago, these were made near the end of the last ice age. Thousands of paintings, by the way, not just a handful of arrows, nothing like that, just a huge canvas. These were found in 2017, so pretty recently, but it was only last year where they finally went public with these Arctic findings. Now the findings being, paintings of elephants, massive sloths, horses from the Ice Age, snakes, birds, deer, that kind of stuff. This is now one of the largest collections of rock art in South America. Yeah, pregnant women or the origins of the Ninja Turtles? I don't know. I'm on the fence. You tell me. Number 2, the Glacier Girl. Now, before you get worried, no, this next one is not a real person. This next one is a plane. A P-23 aircraft was discovered in Greenland surrounded in ice. Now, during World War II in July 1942, 6 P-38 fighter planes were ordered to make an emergency landing in Greenland due to lousy weather conditions and, of course, low visibility. Now, the crew was thankfully saved, but the Lockheed had to be abandoned, never to be seen again for now 50 years. Recently, it was dug out of 264 feet of snow and ice. It took years to get this plane back up, but now she of course is known as the Glacier Girl, and in 2017, Lewis Energy CEO Rodney Lewis, he bought this plane. Yeah, they just brought a plane out of the ice, and this guy's like, yeah, I'll buy it, debit, no problem. And finally, number 1, a preserved mammoth cub. In 2010, a mummified mammoth cub was discovered in Siberia, right off the coast of Oyogos, named after a nearby village. Yuka, this newfound cub, is now the best preserved mammoth cub discovered in history. Now this was a fascinating find that should have never been seen again, let alone found in such great condition. It's kind of haunting when you look at it. It still looks alive, you know what I mean? But apparently that's not the end of woolly mammoths. Who knew? It was announced only months ago that a team of scientists and entrepreneurs over at a company called Colossal, they're now planning to bring the woolly mammoth back to life. For reasons, for science reasons. The last mammoth to walk the planet alive was around 10,500 years ago, but what if they were alive today? Colossal raised over $15 million, and now they're working on reviving that woolly mammoth. They're doing this to ideally decelerate the melting of the Arctic permafrost and to save modern elephants from extinction, and of course, to advance CRISPR editing. We love science, maybe a little too much, I don't know. Is it a good idea to bring the woolly mammoth back to life, or are we just, setting them up for another slow, horrible demise once again?